Arizona Territory, July 1887. The sun had dropped low, casting long shadows across the Mojave scrub when Elias Granger spotted her barefoot, dust-covered, and heavy with child staggering alone through the desert like a ghost too stubborn to lie down. He pulled hard on the reins. His horse, Dusty, huffed as he slowed to a stop. "Madam," Elias called out, voice low but firm. "You need help." The woman turned her head, blinking against the orange light. Her dress was torn, her lips dry and cracked. One hand clutched her swollen belly like she was holding herself together. "Please," she rasped, "do not leave me here." Elias swung down from the saddle and closed the distance fast. Up close, she looked near the end of her strength. He held out a canteen. "Drink slow, take your time." She took it with both hands, trembling hard. Water spilled down her chin as she drank. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Mabel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mabel Kelley." He crouched beside her, steadying the canteen. "Elias Granger, I have a horse and a camp not far. You cannot stay out here. Let me help you." Her eyes brimmed with tears. She nodded once. Within minutes, he had her up on Dusty, riding ahead while he walked beside them, hands steady on the reins. Her breathing was shallow, strained. "You got family nearby?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, they left me behind." "Who did?" "My husband," she whispered, her voice cracked. "He said the baby was not his, took our wagon and left me while I was sleeping." Elias gritted his teeth. "That man's no husband." She looked down. "This baby's all I have left." They reached Elias's small camp just as the sun kissed the horizon. He helped her down, laid out blankets near the fire, and got her settled with more water and a strip of jerky she could barely chew. Her ankles were swollen, her face pale. Elias worked quietly, boiling coffee and watching her from the corner of his eye. She had not said much more, but the way she held her belly protective, desperate, made his chest ache. He had come out here to forget. 2 years ago, he had lost everything in a barn fire: his ranch, his brother, and every head of cattle he had ever raised. Since then, he had been drifting from town to town, picking up work where he could, never staying long enough to let anything matter. But now, watching Mabel tremble under his blanket, he felt something stir in him that he had not felt in a long time. Purpose. "You are safe now," he said quietly. "I will not let anything happen to you." She looked up at him, her eyes damp. "Why are you being kind to me?" He sat on the opposite side of the fire, elbows on knees. "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything, and because you should not have to do this alone." She stared at the flames, her fingers curling over her belly. "How far along are you?" he asked. 8 months, maybe a little more." "You are strong, Mabel," he said. "You got this far on your own. That means something." She looked at him then, really looked at him. Her voice was soft. "You are the first person who has looked at me like I am not broken." Elias blinked, then let out a quiet breath. "You are not broken, you are surviving." The wind kicked up, shaking the canvas flap he had tied over a wagon frame to make shelter. The desert cooled fast after dark. He stood. "You rest, I will stay up a while, keep the fire going." But she reached out just a bit. "Wait." He paused. "Could you sit closer?" Elias nodded. He sat beside her, not touching, but close enough she could feel his warmth. They sat like that in silence, the fire between them and the stars overhead beginning to show. After a while, Mabel's breathing evened out. She was asleep. But Elias stayed awake, watching the horizon, hand resting on the rifle beside him. He was not going to let anything take her from this world. Not now. When midnight came, she stirred with a sharp gasp. His head snapped toward her. "What is it?" Her face pinched. "I think it is starting." Elias moved fast, laying out clean cloth, boiling water. He had helped deliver calves before, but never a child. Still, he kept his voice calm, steady. "You are not alone, Mabel. I am right here." She cried through it, teeth clenched, sweat running down her brow. And Elias never left her side, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, doing everything he could. Before dawn, in the first soft blue light of morning, the baby arrived, a red-faced, squalling girl with a strong voice. Mabel wept as Elias laid the baby on her chest. "She is perfect," she whispered. He looked down at them, something deep rising in his chest. "You did it," he said softly. Mabel held the baby close, then looked up at him. "I do not want to go on alone." "You do not have to," she blinked at him. I mean it, Mabel. I know we just met, but I feel like I was meant to find you out there, you and that little girl." Her eyes searched his. "But what does that mean?" "It means," Elias swallowed, marry me before the sun clears that ridge. Let me take care of you, both of you." She stared at him, stunned, but then she nodded. "Yes, I will." By the time dawn split the sky open with gold, Elias and Mabel stood together under the pale light, hands clasped, vows spoken over the fire by the only witness they had, God and the wide desert hum. He kissed her gently, their baby between them, wrapped tight in a blanket. And for the first time in years, Elias Granger felt like he had come home. By late morning, the sky had gone pale and sharp with heat, and the newborn slept curled against Mabel's breast, her tiny fingers curled around the edge of her mother's shift. Elias had fashioned a shaded lean-to from brush and his saddle blanket, just enough to keep the sun off Mabel and the baby. He moved quietly around the camp, careful not to disturb either of them, his boots pressing soft hollows into the sand. He hadn't meant to tie his life to someone again. But when he'd said the vows, something in him settled like dust after a storm. Now, watching Mabel sleep with her brow smooth and her breathing deep, he wasn't sorry, not in the least. She stirred when he returned from the creek with a damp cloth. "Still hot?" he asked. She nodded, pushing damp hair from her temple. "Feels like I've been boiled." He knelt beside her, gently wiping her forehead. The baby gave a soft sigh in her sleep, then settled again. "She's quiet," Elias said. "Only now," Mabel murmured. "She cried near every minute the last 2 months. Kicked so hard I thought she'd knock out a rib." He smiled, then stood. "I'm going to see about a place with more shade. There's a grove near the ridgeline. Won't take long." Mabel's fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. "Don't go too far." He crouched again, his voice low. "I won't. And I'll leave the rifle close, just in case." She nodded. "I know you would protect us." Elias touched her shoulder lightly before heading out, weaving through the scrub. The heat pressed down like a wet cloth, but he moved steady, scanning for signs of water, shelter, any signs of game. He found what he was looking for just past a tumble of stone, an outcrop of mesquite and cottonwood stitched around a half-dry spring. Enough shade for a small camp, and better cover than where they were now. By the time he returned, Mabel had managed to sit upright with the baby nestled against her chest in a sling made from one of his spare shirts. She looked up as he approached, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly. "Find anything? There's trees and a spring." "Half a mile, maybe less." Her eyes drifted toward the horizon. "I can walk it, just need a little help getting up." "Let's give it an hour," Elias said. "Sun'll ease some by then." She didn't argue, but her gaze lingered on the distant line of green. He set about breaking camp, careful with their few supplies. The canvas shelter came down easy, and he packed it with the blankets and dried meat. When he reached for the empty canteen, Mabel's voice stopped him. "Did you ever think about having a child?" Elias straightened slowly. "Once. A long time ago." She didn't press, just nodded and turned her attention back to the baby. After a long pause, she said, "I might call her Clara." He let the name settle in his mind. "That's a good name." "She doesn't look like anyone but herself," Mabel said. "But it feels right." Elias glanced at her, the way her fingers stroked the baby's back, the quiet steadiness in her voice. He realized then that she wasn't just surviving anymore, she was beginning to root. When the sun dipped low enough to cast long fingers of shadow, Elias helped her to her feet. She leaned on his arm as they walked, slow and steady, Dusty trailing behind with the gear tied tight across his back. The baby slept through the movement, her small breath warm against Mabel's collarbone. They reached the grove just as a breeze stirred the branches. Elias spread the blanket beneath the tallest cottonwood, laying out their things while Mabel eased down carefully, cradling Clara against her. It was quiet here. The kind of quiet that didn't press, didn't threaten, just deep and wide like something waiting to be filled. Elias sat close, unwrapping a strip of dried venison and offering her a piece. "You think you'll stay out here?" she asked after a few bites. "I hadn't planned on staying anywhere," he said, "but I could build something here, not much." "Just enough." She looked over at him, her eyes clear despite the exhaustion. "Would you do that, for us?" "I married you before the sun came up," he said. "That wasn't a borrowed promise." Mabel looked down at Clara, then back at Elias. Then I'd like that, a home. Something we build with our own hands. He nodded once, and that was enough. The last of the evening light stretched across the grove, soft gold filtering through the leaves. Elias leaned back against the tree trunk, watching Mabel and Clara, the way the baby's tiny hand clutched her mother's dress. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just stayed there, close enough to feel the warmth of what they were becoming. Elias drove the point of his shovel into the hard ground, sweat sliding down his back as the sun climbed higher. The grove's soil was stubborn, but it yielded inch by inch as he cleared space for a cooking trench. He'd already dragged fallen logs up from the creek for shelter posts, and by week's end, they'd have a lean-to with a proper roof. Not much, but it would stand behind him. Mabel sat on a blanket with Clara in her arms, her sewing basket open beside her. She worked a needle through the sleeve of a dress she'd found at the bottom of Elias's pack his late sister-in-law's, he'd said. The fabric was faded calico, but it would do for now. Mabel's own dress had been patched enough to show the threads. "You always this handy with a needle?" Elias asked, setting the shovel aside. Mabel didn't look up. "Started stitching when I was 7. My mother said a woman ought to know how to mend what she loves." Elias dusted his hands on his pants and sat cross-legged on the grass nearby. "She teach you much else?" "She taught me to keep quiet and stay useful. Didn't leave much room for anything more than that." He rested his forearms on his knees. "You don't strike me as someone who stays quiet." "I did," she said. "More than I should have." Clara stirred, letting out a soft, hungry cry. Mabel lifted her blouse and turned slightly, nursing without pause in her stitching. "You ever want to go back?" Elias asked. Mabel's eyes narrowed on the seam. "To Kansas, no. There's nothing left there but empty houses and regrets." Elias pulled a blade of grass and twisted it between his fingers. "You said he left you while you slept. You ever think about what you'd do if he came back?" Her hands stilled. "I'd tell him she's none of his business and send him off with a rifle barrel pointed at his heart." Elias watched her, quiet a moment. "You'd shoot him?" "I'd aim to scare," she said. "But if he touched her, I wouldn't miss." Wind stirred through the cottonwoods, rustling the leaves with a sound like distant rain. Elias leaned back and looked toward the treetops. "You ever think about naming her after someone you knew?" he asked. "I thought about my grandmother," she said. "But Clara's hers alone. I don't want her tied to anyone else's story, just her own." Elias nodded, then stood. "I was thinking of heading into Benson tomorrow. There's a trader there. I can barter for flour, maybe a tin of peaches if I'm lucky." Mabel shifted Clara to her shoulder and burped her gently. "You planning to ride back the same day? Be gone at first light, back before dusk if Dusty holds steady." He hesitated. "You'll be all right here." She looked up at him, expression even. "We got food, water's close. If something comes, I've got your pistol and 2 good hands." He crossed to her and crouched low, brushing a strand of hair off her cheek. "I don't like leaving you alone. I don't like being left," she said, her voice low. "But I can tell the difference between a man who says he's coming back and one who means it." Elias met her gaze. "I mean it." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "Then go. Bring back something sweet if you can." Next morning, Elias rode out before the sun crested the ridge. The journey to Benson took most of the day, the trail dry and rutted. He bartered a length of jerky and a pair of spurs for flour, a sack of beans, and just as he'd hoped, a small tin of preserved peaches. On the ride back, he kept Clara's name in his mind like a prayer, watching the horizon for signs of trouble. But the land stayed still, the sky wide and empty. He returned just as the light turned soft. Smoke curled from a small fire, and Mabel sat with Clara nestled in the crook of her legs, humming something low and wordless. She looked up when he stepped into the clearing. "You came back." "Wasn't planning otherwise," Elias said, dropping the saddlebag beside her. "I brought peaches." Mabel reached for the tin. "You remembered." He settled beside her as she pulled open the lid and scooped out a sliver of soft fruit. She tasted it, then held a bit to Clara's lips. The baby licked it and wrinkled her nose. "Too sweet," Mabel said, laughing quietly. Elias rested his chin on his fist, watching them. "She'll come around." Mabel tilted her head. You always this good at keeping promises? Only since I made the right ones. She reached over and took his hand. Then stay the night out here, all of us under the stars. No roof yet, but the sky's wide enough. Elias didn't answer. He lay back on the blanket, her fingers still folded in his. Clara slept between them, her breath steady, her tiny hand curled around Mabel's thumb. And for the first time, it didn't feel like surviving anymore. It felt like something better. 3 weeks after Clara's birth, the desert air turned sharp with late summer wind, rattling through the cottonwoods and pushing the scent of mesquite and dry creaked through the clearing. The lean-to Elias built stood firm, roofed with overlapping hides and brush, its walls braced with sun-bleached timber scavenged from a collapsed line shack 2 miles north. Mabel had stitched curtains from old flour sacks, hung them with bent nails along the open side. They fluttered like quiet flags in the breeze. Elias came back from checking the trapline with a jackrabbit swinging from his belt and dust in the creases of his shirt. Mabel sat outside, her boots resting on a flat stone warmed by the sun. Clara lay in a cradle Elias had carved from pine, lined with cotton batting and the soft scraps of Mabel's old dresses. She slept with her mouth open, one fist curled tight beneath her chin. You look like you've been chasing ghosts, Mabel said, shielding her eyes as he approached. Rabbit wasn't keen on being caught, Elias replied, crouching to clean it near the fire pit. Got a snag of thorns in my boot for the trouble. Mabel reached for his foot and tugged his boot off. Let's see it. He winced as she peeled back his sock. A thin splinter of mesquite bark stuck just beneath the skin. You always this graceful in the wild? She asked. I'm better with cattle than I am with brush, Elias muttered. She plucked the sliver free with the corner of a clean cloth and poured a trickle of boiled water over the spot. You'll live. He stayed still while she wrapped it with a strip of linen. You ever think about schooling? Mabel tied off the cloth. You asking if I can read? I was thinking about Clara. When she's older, there's a town west of here, St. David. They've got a circuit teacher come through twice a month. She looked toward the cradle. My mother never saw the use, said books didn't feed a family. They give a girl something to hold on to, Elias said quietly, something no man can take. Mabel ran her fingers over her knees. I'd like her to have that, to know more than I did. She will. If we stay out here, I'll ride her in when she's ready. What about you? She asked. He blinked. What about me? You said you didn't plan to stay anywhere long. You still feel that way? Elias tossed a twig into the fire and watched it catch. I used to think moving kept me from losing more than I already had, but I was wrong about that. She waited, watching him. I didn't lose anything by staying here, he said. I found something solid. You, Clara. This ground? Mabel didn't speak for a moment. Then, I thought I'd never be more than what I was left behind for. Elias turned to her. You've been more every day since I found you. She reached for his hand, her thumb brushing the callus at the base of his finger. Then let's build on that. They worked through the afternoon side by side. Mabel boiled the rabbit with wild onion and desert sage, stirring slowly while Clara made soft, sleeping sounds in her cradle. Elias patched the saddle where the leather had cracked, humming under his breath, a habit he hadn't realized he'd kept from his younger days. The wind died down before night fell, and the grove grew still. After supper, Mabel folded the worn shawl around Clara and laid her gently into the cradle. She turned to Elias where he sat sharpening his knife by lantern light. Do you miss it? She asked. The riding, the open country. He looked up. Some days, but I don't miss not having anyone to ride back to. Mabel stepped toward him, her bare feet quiet in the dirt. I didn't know what love looked like until I watched you hold her. Elias set the knife down slowly. I didn't know what it felt like until you said yes. She knelt beside him, resting her head against his shoulder. I think we've both traveled a long way to get here. He wrapped his arm around her, drawing her close. And we're staying, as long as you want to. I want to, she whispered. The lantern flickered low, casting their shadows long across the lean-to walls. Outside, the desert stretched wide and quiet, but here, wrapped in warmth and the scent of sage and wood smoke, Elias and Mabel sat anchored to something deeper than land. And for the first time, neither of them feared the morning. By mid-September, the heat had loosened its grip on the land. and the wind carried the scent of drying grass and distant rain. Mabel stood at the edge of the grove with Clara in her arms, watching Elias drive the final fence stake into the earth. The posts formed a wide half-circle around a clearing he'd cleared of brush, a space he planned to seed with hardy beans and squash come spring. Each swing of his hammer was deliberate, the rhythm steady as his breath. Mabel shifted Clara to her hip and called out, "You planning to fence in the whole territory?" Elias paused and looked over his shoulder. "Just enough to keep the mule from wandering once I find one worth the trade." "You still thinking about that sorrel we saw outside St. David? Too old," he said, barely held its head up. "I'm not feeding a mouth that won't pull its weight." She smiled and moved to meet him halfway across the clearing, her boots leaving prints in the soft dirt. Clara gurgled, her head nestled against Mabel's collarbone, eyes drifting closed. "We'll need more blankets if we're staying through winter," Mabel said, "and something to keep her dry if the roof starts leaking." "I'll ride to Fort Huachuca at the end of the month," Elias said. "It's a longer trip, but the army trades regular." "I might come back with canvas and a coil of stove pipe. Could you bring back a mirror?" she asked. He looked at her, brow lifted slightly. "I haven't seen my face in months," she said. "I forget what I look like." Elias stepped closer and touched her cheek, fingers rough but careful. "You look like the woman who gave me a reason to stop running." Mabel blinked, caught off guard. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one that matters." She leaned into him, her free hand resting over his heart. "You always say what you mean." "I had to learn how," he said. "Took me too long." They stood like that until Clara stirred, fist pressing against her mother's chest. Mabel kissed the top of her daughter's head, then looked back at Elias. "I've been thinking," she said. "If you're going to build a barn and bring in animals, we'll need more than just the two of us to keep it up." "I figured I'd ask around when I'm in town," Elias said. "Maybe hire on a boy come spring, someone looking for honest work." "I could teach letters," she said. "If any families nearby want their young ones taught, we could trade schooling for help." "You'd want to teach again?" "I never had the chance to start," she said. "But now I've got something to offer. I can read well enough, I can write. That's more than some folks get." Elias nodded. "We'll put up a second table. Make space for it." That night, after Clara fed and settled into the cradle with her feet tucked under the new wool scrap Mabel had sewn together from old shirts, Elias joined Mabel beneath the cottonwood, lantern light casting long shapes against the bark. She'd spread a quilt across the grass, and he lay beside her, the earth warm beneath his back. "Was your brother younger or older?" she asked softly, eyes on the stars. 2 years younger," Elias said. "He always wanted to ride north, see the plains. We never got the chance. He died before we finished the herd." "I'm sorry," Mabel said. "I used to carry that loss like it was my fault," Elias murmured. "Like if I'd done one thing different, he might have lived." Mabel reached for his hand. "It never goes away," he said, "but it doesn't weigh like it used to." "Not since you—" She laid her head on his shoulder. "We don't have to carry it alone anymore." "No," he said, "we don't." The wind moved through the grove, low and steady, and they stayed like that long after the lantern dimmed, the months that followed passed quiet and full. Elias made the trip to Fort Huachuca and returned with canvas for the roof, a bundle of wool blankets, a glass mirror wrapped in oilcloth, and a small iron stove that took 2 full days to haul into place. Mabel strung up drying herbs and taught 3 neighbor children their letters twice a week beneath the cottonwood. Elias traded fence work for a spotted mule and cut stone for a foundation that would one day hold a house. They married again that winter, proper this time, with a preacher from St. David and a gathering of folks who brought tin plates and cinnamon bread and clay pots filled with beans. Mabel wore a blue shawl stitched with tiny white stars, and Clara reached for her father's beard with both hands as he said the words. Later that night, after the last guest rode off and the fire burned low, Mabel stood in the doorway of their shelter, Clara asleep in her arms, watching Elias hammer the final beam into the frame of the future kitchen. "You never stop building," she said. He looked up at her, his face lined with soot and sweat, eyes steady. "I'm not building for me, I'm building for us." She stepped toward him, laid Clara in her cradle, and reached for his hand. "Then let's build the rest together." They stood in the half-framed kitchen, the stars wide above them, and kissed slow, like there was no need to rush. Years later, the house stood strong beneath a shingle roof, with wide windows and a garden that stretched in tidy rows. Clara grew tall and clever, reading before most children spoke clearly, her hair always tied back with a strip of blue ribbon. Mabel taught half the county's children their letters at a table Elias built with his own hands. And Elias, though his back grew stiff with time, kept riding fence and carving toys for Clara with the same quiet strength that had brought him across the desert and into love. They never left the grove. Not once. Because sometimes, after all the losing and wandering, the world gave back something lasting, something whole, and when it did, they held it close and never let go.